Welcome back to the Civilnet Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Elliott. I'm joined today by a friend of the show and recurring guest, military expert at APRI, Armenia, Leonid Nersisyan. Leonid, thanks for joining. So, Leonid, there's a lot to uncover. Let's start with the most obvious one here. So, the Army released, and also in English. So, if anyone's actually interested, you can find this on the MOD website. If I'm not mistaken, it's mil.am, mil.am. But they have the Army reform concept from 2025 to 2035. So this is what the next 10 years of the Army is going to look like. So can you give us your off-the-cuff first impressions of this document before we unpack it?
So it's a quite high-level document as it's a concept. So you will have many problems outlined there, which I think is good to see. At the same time, when it's about changes and development, that's very high level. You won't find the concrete how things are going to be changed. So the most important thing is the work done after the concept is out. So it's, at my opinion, should be consisting of two parts. First one is writing down some concrete plans. And what is even more important, assigning concrete people who are responsible for this part of change, that part of change, giving deadlines realistic but not too long. So another part is not trying to write everything in doctrines from very beginning, more experimenting a lot, trying out different approaches on the battlefield, on the training battlefield, of course. But there is a risk that there will be an attempt to just write everything into thousands of pages of documents, and that's, I think, not very effective nowadays because things are changing. You can't know which approach is 100% right one if you haven't tried things. So probably modeling, testing out, experimenting on small units is something where how things should go. But in general, I would say that I would be more happy if I would have seen this document out maybe 1.5 years ago, something like that. I think it was quite possible to do it a year or more ago. So because it's quite a, as I mentioned, high-level document, there was no kind of fantastic deep research in this document. That's quite common sense things. At least most of the document is about common sense things, I would say, at least to those who are following the topic and are professionals.
There are some interesting points that do kind of indicate that there's some self-awareness of what are the problems and shortcomings of the Army. The two that really, well, actually, let's say the three that really stood out to me is, number one, they want to increase the size of the professional Army, which would also mean decreasing conscription to 1 year instead of 2 years, which already, I think, makes a big difference. The other interesting one is they talked about women's participation in the Army to increase those numbers. And of course, increase their safety, their, for lack of a better term, comfort. Obviously, the Army is not supposed to be a comfortable place, but you understand, right? To accommodate the fact that you have a new gender and all the everything that comes to play in Armenia's already macho culture, but in the Army, it's probably even more so. And then the third point that I found quite interesting is they had a dedicated section to communication with the general public, which, as we all know, is absolutely disastrous. The Army up until this point felt no need to talk to the taxpayer, to talk to the people whose children they take for 2 years of their lives. We're about to enter 2025. The report on the 2020 war has not been released yet. So you have parents 5 years later who don't know what happened to their sons, their brothers, their nephews, their uncles. So that to me is, increasing the transparency of the Army is one of the biggest, if we want to stem the tide of young men reaching age 16 and migrating to Russia to avoid military service, there has to be better rapport between the Army and the people. So anyway, tell me more about what your thoughts are on these 3 points.
First, about conscription, there is no mention to which extent they want to shorten the service in the document. They just say that until 2027, they want to make the conscription shorter.
Sorry, I should specify in the parliament they were talking about 1 year.
Yeah, but that's like quite primitive calculations when you can have a look how many 17 and 18 years boys you have at the moment, like born 18 years ago. You can understand more or less how many conscripts we have in army. Of course, not a real number, but I think with mistake of 10% you can. And if you want to at least keep the size of armed forces, if you shorten the service to 1 year, you need to get extra 10K at least, 10,000 professionals in just already 2 years left for that. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but I would be surprised if it will happen, kind of. In the good way, I would be surprised.
Yeah, it's unlikely.
You mentioned the information policy, the coverage of armed forces. Of course, they mention raising the prestige very boldly in the document. But at the moment, with the work being done at the moment, I don't believe you can hire 10,000 professionals. Even with a very high salary, which is quite high at the moment, sure. People just don't know about that it's quite high there.
Yeah. I also think it's also the problem of developing countries, right? It's always hard to, even in Western countries, it's hard to fill the ranks of an entirely professional army, even with all the benefits and the bonuses and so on.
There is another problem. I mean, we need more people than we have now. So how you can, the goal is not to keep the same manpower now. So we need more. And in that sense, I don't know. I would be surprised if in 27 we will see that the conscription is shortened to 1 year. At least if there is no peace agreement signed. If there is a peace agreement signed, there can be a political decision to do that, but which I would consider wrong, by the way. But that's the only way I see how this goal can be achieved. Or there should be like a really fantastically effective campaign to change things in 2 years. So we have queues of people wanting to join armed forces ranks.
Okay. So both those scenarios are nice fantasies. I don't think that's ever going to happen in both.
I mean, second is much easier to organize, I think.
Yeah,
good media campaign and things like that, and many new benefits and things like that. I think that's possible, but much more possible than peace agreement, to be fair. So
yeah. I mean. Yeah. Okay. Well, give us a little bit of an update on the I don't want to say the pace, but let's say some of the achievements in army reforms so far. We are seeing a significant flurry of activity. We signed a defense cooperation agreement with Italy last week. We had Papikian in the United States, in D.C., and then in France, both of which have been, there's not a lot of details that have come out, but both of which have been hailed as pretty historic decisions. And we also see, we had a participation in a big Greek military training last month. So you are starting to see like we're kind of breaking out of our isolation, or at least we're not hanging out with Belarus anymore. Like we're going to serious armies. So what's going on underneath the surface?
We see that, of course, the French involvement is the largest. I think even with the open part of the information, we know about the permanent representative of French army in MOD at the moment, in Armenian MOD, helping with reforms. We know about instructors coming and going from open sources, from media. That's quite a new thing, of course, for Armenia. We had this kind of activities with Russia previously, but with Western Army never. So that's an interesting development. And I think this kind of visits to France, which are now quite regular, and visits to Armenia just showcase that there is probably a will to extend these approaches have more of the cooperation in these fields. And at the same time, we see that this time there is there is nothing on press release about new armament procurement, for example. But that doesn't mean that this process is also not going. So
our side is generally quiet about these things.
Yeah. So probably sides agreed not to disclose this time that maybe they discussed some new interesting things too. So and. It's not like with Indian armament that next day anyway it will be media. So
I was gonna say, like, they're the ones who are yeah. But the French and the States are usually quiet. It's the Indians who.
So we see same process with States at the lower, of course, level than with French in terms of there's no lethal armament procurement process, and there is less involvement of pure military personnel, so still there is an advisor working a bit more on the strategic and governance issues rather than pure tactics and military tactics and strategy, which is also like, I think if we were discussing this 5 years or 7 years ago, and some of us would tell that we will have a French and American advisor in the Ministry of Defense, people would call us crazy. I think.
And no more Russian advisors in the Ministry of Defense.
So that would be quite strange. But we have that now. Very interesting to see where things are moving after the Trump administration is coming. So would it be like frozen on the level we reached, or would it still continue developing? I think many things will, of course, also be related to what Armenia is ready to give Trump, I don't know, or at least propose to Trump. So let's see. But with French, I think nothing is going to change in the bad direction.
No, in that sense, we're lucky, right? Is that from the political level in France, there's unilateral support. It's like, I would say it's almost comparable to U.S. support for Israel. So it doesn't matter if you're going left or right. It's whoever replaces Macron will be just as pro-Armenian as he was. So.
At least not. I mean, I can see a political power in France who is cutting the pipelines which are already created. Maybe there can be a guy who is not creating new ones, but I can't imagine the one who is decreasing the cooperation.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the French involvement is certainly interesting, and what we do know of is, the main focus has been on our special forces and mountain training and so on. But the regular army itself, are we seeing any that we know of, or that you're able to talk about, like changes in how they operate? Are we starting to see more flexibility? Are they more mobile? Are they training more regularly? Anything like that you can tell us about?
I think we can't go into details of concrete training and what is being done. Mountainous training includes, by the way, mountainous means there is a mountainous brigade in France. But they include, as they call, cavalry, for example, which is, of course, armed vehicles. Yeah. And in their case, I think wheeled tanks they also use in the mountainous brigades. So it's about same like pure military exercises and armed forces. They just they are using the mountainous troops because Armenia is mountainous, so the expertise is more relevant. Plus, I mean, there is a quite hilarious thing that in Armenia there were never specialized mountainous troops.
Is it hilarious, or does it just speak to the level of
hilarious in the bad sense. I mean,
it stopped being funny after 2020. It just became tragic at this point. It's the staggering failure of our army is crazy.
So, I mean, that makes sense to push in that direction because the direction is still purely military, but also covers a gap into one of the biggest gaps, kind of. So.
Yeah, but pardon me, this is actually relevant to the next question, but I do want to qualify. I mean the failure of our military thinkers, of our defense infrastructure. I don't mean the rank and file, our soldiers. I just want to not to upset anybody, as my heart is with every single one of our soldiers who is defending. So let's talk about this, the tactical level of thinking in the army. I mean, we are seeing some reshuffling of some senior officers. Last February, of course, was quite famous. One thing that went a little bit more under the radar was last month, if I'm not mistaken. You had 4 or 5 new appointees, including the guy in charge of our special forces, who used to be, who also came from Vazgen Sargsyan Military College, if I'm not mistaken, and is also one of the more NATO guys. So we are quietly seeing that the higher ranks of the army are being stuffed with Western-trained, pro-Western minded guys. What can you say about this?
Yeah, we can, I think, clearly see the trend, of course, and the minimal thing, even if there is a decision, that political decision that we're working more with NATO armies, at least the language skills for the beginning are important for the senior staff. And I mean, I'm not saying that that's the only cause, of course, but that's important to have people who are speaking the same language with the guys from abroad. And I don't mean only English, I mean the same language, more general.
They think the same.
Yeah. So that's, I think, quite obvious that there is a need to do that if we're going that way. Yeah. And I think that it's even more important to start now feeling the 1 position lower, 2 positions lower, at least this are already like colonels, lieutenant colonels, with people who are capable. So that's, I think, next step which should be done. And for that, I think there is let's say, we have these people in Armenia, I think, at least part of them we have. Many of them are not in armed forces anymore, but I don't think that all of them are going to refuse to come back if they're being kind of given the position which they deserve, and where they will have some freedom to do some real job and change things. So if it's that approach, I think that many people can come back. So that's maybe not a very easy task, but a very quite possible task to understand where are the smarter and well prepared people, and to try to hire them all back. So that's a matter of political will, of course, and this kind of approach. So I know personally cases when, let's say, the department head, which is now on the place, is much less capable than the deputy he had a few years ago, and the deputy who left. Like, you can't even compare, but
it's always like that, though, right? The deputy ministers and so on, who are all doing the real work, but they're not getting the recognition. Yeah,
but minister is a bit different. Minister is a political position, but head of department in armed forces, that's not a political position. That's that's a key position. If you have a wrong person there, you will have a stagnating department. There won't be anything good going on, and you can see that by departments now, how some of them are much ahead of others, and that's very much personal normally.
Do you have some departments that you're kind of proud of?
I don't want to go into details into this kind of personal.
No, but just give us some good news of like, hey, these guys seem to they're doing the right thing, or things are moving forward.
I mean, you can let's zoom out from these concrete people and things. You can see that, for example, artillery guys are doing quite a lot of things. I mean, even you don't need to know anybody to understand that. You can see procurement, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, new contract with India, actually, from a couple weeks ago.
You can see with French, you can see the work done. So there are like lots of things going on there.
Yeah.
I think that's quite easy to understand, that guys here know what they're doing. At least they know it better than some others, for example. So we just want everyone doing same intensity work. So
ideally, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think of the rumors? I mean, if you don't have to confirm or deny, but that we'd be purchasing K2 tanks from South Korea.
I've heard the news, but I don't think that with Korea we still have we already have the relations which are allowing procuring armament there yet. At least what I've heard. I think it will take time to create these relations. If we need K2 tanks or not, that's a good question.
Well, because they're designed for mountain warfare, right?
Yes, but do we need it now as like first priority procurement or not? That's a good question, which I think needs a good brainstorm with several specialists to understand, because that's a quite expensive toy to buy.
So it's one of the most. I think it's
that's
the most
one of the
most.
That's I think maybe not anymore, because they got huge contracts now. I think price may have gone down.
It was $8 million per tank, essentially.
Yeah, I've heard that it was 14 before. So if it's 8 now, that means what time? 8 million is cheaper than French Leclerc was, for example. So, but that's the most popular one at the moment. So
yeah, the Poles are building 1,000 of them.
So that's a quite interesting. I mean, if we want to buy a tank, that's not a bad one to choose.
Yeah.
Other question, if we need to buy tanks in 2025, for example, or we need to buy many other things, and then.
Why do you say that?
No, I mean, because we have some left, of course, tanks. I mean, and also we should understand that on many, let's say, many directions, they are not there on the borders. They are not really designed for tank usage. I mean, the forests in Tavush are not for tanks that much. The mountains in Syunik, I mean, their added value is going to be limited in that sense. So there will be added value, but I would, for example, look at 105 millimeter artillery, for example, for Syunik mountains rather than tanks at the moment. Tanks later, maybe. Or if we have like unlimited resources, we can, of course, buy the tanks too, but we don't, as you know. Yeah. So we have more resources than before. Another option there is, there is a huge queue on these tanks, so we can go and, let's say, book our place in the queue anyway. So we're not going to, if we decide to buy K2 today, we're not going to get them any soon anyway. It's going to be in 4 or 5 years, I suppose, after the Polish contract and some others.
But the Poles are going to be building them in Poland, which is interesting. Because I was thinking about that, the logistics of actually getting them from South Korea all the way to Armenia.
That's a problem, by the way, because flying them in, if you can fly in T-72 with a bit of you need to take off some things out of it, but you can fit it in Ilyushin 76. That's going not to be a pleasant flight for pilots probably and everything, but it's possible. K2 you can't fit in that kind of transport aircraft, so that should be really a strategic airlifter, which we don't have, and probably it's possible to organize, but that's also going to put quite a price on this process.
Spare parts, upkeep. I mean, it's not that easy, and especially as we know during wartime, the gates just shut.
So that's an interesting matter for discussion, but I don't believe that this is going to happen like soon. Kind of.
Fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about India, because there's constant shopping and constant rumors and interesting developments there. What I'm not seeing, and I defer to your expertise here, I'd like to see. You tell me if it's a good idea or not. But the Indians have very good experience in high altitude mountain warfare against the Chinese, against Pakistan. Why are we not getting some of their experts here to come train our rank and file?
Good question. I would even think that it could be an interesting format where they and French can try to cooperate on something.
They already train regularly with the U.S. Army and the French.
No, I mean in terms of Armenian context.
But I mean, it wouldn't be weird. Like they have experience doing
it won't
that.
be
so
weird,
I don't get
I
why.
think. That would be interesting. I think that maybe in this sense it's on both sides why it's like slowly moving. I mean, we know that last year there was, not last year, this year yet, there was a defense cooperation plan for 2025 signed, and training was mentioned there. So I don't know which kind of training is there. Of course, the training related to armament which we procured, that you don't even need to know if it's there or not. It's going to be
included,
there. Yeah. So if there is more, maybe we will know about it in 2025 or maybe not. That also depends on how it will be organized. As it's not about armament sales, maybe Indians won't write about that in the newspapers. So, because that's companies who are doing that mostly. It's not coming from Indian MOD or somebody. That's like the private companies trying to PR themselves as much as possible.
Yeah, and they don't have private defense firms as far as I know. So it would be Indian Army guys to come and train us. They don't have the equivalent of Wagner or Blackwater.
But I think with Indians there is much more which can be done in terms of capacity building and things like that, because mostly we're buying stuff from there at the moment.
Yeah.
If we look, we need to try to change that to some extent.
Why do you think? In what way? You saying we should buy
more,
less?
No. Buying is fine. I mean, bring more of capacity building also.
So create joint projects and they would build in Armenia.
No, I mean in terms of training, exercises, drills, and this kind of activities. Because as you mentioned, French are good at mountainous warfare, but compare mountains in France and in India, and the kind of real on-the-ground experience too. So in India, you have in Himalayas, you have roads on the height of 5-6 kilometers sometimes. So that's quite fantastic. We don't even have mountains like that in Armenia.
Yeah, so it would be really valuable to get some of their expertise here.
Yeah, it would be very interesting, I think.
What, in your opinion, what's one of the main focuses that we should be taking when it comes to rebuilding the capabilities of our armed forces? I mean, we do see a lot of. I mean, the two main purchases we're really seeing are air defense and artillery. That's pretty much really what we're looking at. I mean, I'm sure there's more that we're not being made aware of, obviously. What do you think we should really? What should be the priority for the army right now?
There is a very low-hanging fruit at the moment, which I think is very also interesting politically to do, and to say that we did a huge step forward. It's just the digitalization of conscription and mobilization. So what I mean is getting rid of military commissariats.
That's in the document, by the way. We forgot to talk about it. But
it's in the document, and I think that's the lowest hanging fruit in this document, because, I mean, I don't know how many IT companies in Armenia can do this project. 30, maybe 40.
Yeah.
Many IT companies in Armenia can do this. And technically, there is nothing left to do, because our IDs and passports are digital. If you scan them, there you get everything about yourself. So you just need to add there some data on where you had your service, which is your specialization, maybe some data on what is your latest phone number, because when you buy a SIM card, it's also bought on your passport. So technically, you can have everything there. When you undergo the service, like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago, so everything could be there, and then that's just a very simple database at the end. And when you will need to, for example, mobilize, general staff decides that they need 1,000 infantry guys, 30 artillery officers and 10 air defense officers, and then they can put that, okay, they all finished their service, completed their service not longer than 3 years ago. They can do all these ticks in the boxes, press generate, and they will get a random, absolutely random list of the most, the best options on the table. So, and the people will get the SMS and different types of notification and when and where they should be. So you will need much less of physical infrastructure for that. You won't need officers sitting and doing a secretary job in the military commissariat and getting reach with their job. I mean, you probably know that's I think the least popular state institution in Armenia. I think the military commissariat is the most corrupt.
Yeah.
Okay, you can be corrupt, but in 2020 it was like it just never worked really. So that's the biggest problem. Yeah. So.
And you can't bribe an app pretty much, right? So that pretty
you
much
can
removes
bribe.
a lot of...
You probably will still have problems with bribes, but on different levels, like the medical commission, I think. But
the least amount you need to, the better.
But you will have less places where people can be a corruption. So easier to monitor at the same. The less resources needed to monitor that. Yeah. So that's probably the way forward. And another thing is also from the digitalization field. We buy so many different equipment now from different countries. We have so many Soviet equipment left, and we're not going to scrap it any soon. So that's quite obvious. We're not that rich to scrap everything we have. And we don't see other countries doing that too. So that's, if something works, it works. So we need a integration of all this stuff we buy. And integration is something which is done digitally nowadays too. So that's digital command and control, which allows you also to integrate equipment. For that, of course, there should be direct understanding when doing the procurement that we're just not we're not buying systems anymore. We're buying integrated systems. So you can't the GM200 radar is not very effective if it's just working standalone. Yeah. It's effective if it's synthesizing its image with all other radars Armenian armed forces have, and you have all this data on the screen, and you have all the data about the firing means the surface-to-air missile battalions also. You can exchange this data, you can send the digital orders to every unit you have. So then it's going to be effective. Then you invest X money in buying a system and get 10x of capability after that. That's how things should work. If it's going to be calling each other and trying to send orders on the paper, then everything makes no sense at the end. And what is also good with this kind of digital approach, of course, it also brings changes because everything is working different. Yeah. You can't use the old Ustav, the military regulations anymore with that. So
it's going to force the doctrinal changes.
It forces the change. Of course, for that, we also need a very, I think, serious approach to communications. I mean, radio communications, 4G, Starlink, wires, I mean, optical fiber, everything. I mean, so there should be very modern approaches to communication too. That's, I think, is also from the hard parts in terms of our Armenian reality at the moment. But for example, Starlink, you'll see soon I mean, that's funny that even today it can be used with roaming. You can use it everywhere you want. It just costs a bit more. But you can have already a SATCOM layer in your communications if you want.
What do you make of our burgeoning private defense industry? Are you seeing certain companies that are interesting? Are we creating stuff that is globally competitive, or since we're still in our infancy, there's some stuff that's cool but not going to make a big difference in our defense capabilities?
Oh, I think that there are some companies who are doing a great job. Maybe saying that they are on the verge of global technology, that would be too much. And
no, but competitive, something that makes
competitive
sense.
In terms of price, maybe that you don't have the brand price on the stuff and things like that. But I mean, it would be a big surprise if you started doing something 5-6 years ago and really pouring money in that only 1 year, I would say, or 2 years.
Yeah.
And you're like doing same quality stuff as United States is doing, or somebody. No, that's not from, there is no miracles anyway.
Yeah.
But you can do something, for example, in UAV topic, I think we're not far behind India, for example, in many sense. So we can be some, let's say, average technology provider, not very pricey, which I think is quite trendy nowadays, because very expensive and like top-notch systems also are problematic. You never can have enough of them in many domains. So probably focusing on things which are needed in numbers in Armenia itself for the first phase of development of industry is the best idea. So when you have a local market which already makes sense to invest in something, that's munitions, drones, and many other things.
Do you feel free not to answer this if you're not able to, but we had a few times members of the government and independent reports also showing that for the first time in our history, 10% of our weapons come from Russia. 90% is from abroad or domestic. What I'm just trying to figure out is, what is that 10%? You mentioned munitions. That's why it's like, are we still just buying AK rifles and that's pretty much it? Like, what's that 10% that Russia's still sending us?
There is no open data on that. As I know, in 2021, there was a package of contracts signed, and that's not a secret. I think there were different numbers being stated, I think around $400 million. Of course, that's not AKs for $400 million.
Fair enough.
Air defense, as I understand, mostly. So
are they sending this stuff? It sounds
so
like
that's
they need in Ukraine.
That's a good question. With if they've sent something or not, but we don't know. So we don't know, at least from the open sources. There was the only thing stated was that they brought something once, if you remember. I think Andranik Kocharyan or somebody mentioned. So 10% or 5%, that's not easy to count. We see that this percent is anyway dropping after every contract signed elsewhere. This percent is dropping. So our local procurement package is now the same size as the package of contracts signed with Russia in 2021.
And next year, we have an unprecedented increase in our defense spending, and also an interesting, very significant chunk of spending on domestic defense capabilities. Do you think this is a step in the right direction? Obviously, it's a bit more of a political question, but regardless, I mean, is this extra funding going to make a dent? It's going to make a difference for us.
If you want an industry to exist, of course, you need to invest in it. I would say that you need to have a right balance, because we're in the situation when you need today and now, many things today and now, not in 5 years. Yeah. So it should be a balance. With the spending increase, of course, we understand why, because first we see that our enemy is still willing to keep being an enemy, unfortunately. And second, because we just have more money, we can spend more money on armed forces. And
it's $1.7 billion.
Unfortunately, that triggered a response from Azerbaijan, because there was a moment when they decided not to raise their budget this year, because fundamentally they don't have money to raise their budget this year.
That's why I'm not that worried about that, to be honest. We can unpack that, but yeah.
Yeah, so there was a moment when it was first time, I don't know in how many years, when difference between our budgets was going to be less than x2.
Yeah.
So that was quite interesting. But now then they added $1 billion from their oil fund to the defense budget, and now it's still more than 2 times more, unfortunately. But this time we saw that they started, let's say, investing the reserves of their country for keeping the ratio.
What do you mean?
I mean, they used $1 billion from the oil fund, so for just to keep the ratio between our budgets more than x2.
It should be noted their defense budget includes interior ministry, special services, police. Like there's all kinds of other stuff that goes into it.
Police not, but
I mean the OMON really basically is what I'm talking about. But interior ministry troops. It's
$1 billion out of the budget next year, which is not about armed forces. Almost $1 billion. So their pure military budget is around $4 billion, and our is 1.7. So that's a bit more than x2, so which they still kept. But I mean, there were years when it was x6, x5, so it's still x2 is something you can work with if you're defending side. So I
should mention the 400 million for private industry is not coming from, it's not included in the 1.7 billion. So there's all kinds of different we won't get into the nitty gritty, but it's not that big a gap to be worried about. But I do want to talk about them. I do want to talk about their ongoing reforms. As far as I understand it, is there any serious analysis of what they're doing? Like, you know, they have this saying, right, that the generals always are always preparing for the last war, not the next war, right? Do we have some kind of dedicated desk that is every single day going, okay, what are they doing? Are we able to counter this? You're laughing. I'm worried. I'm worried about this reaction, man.
I mean, there is definitely a desk.
No, I mean a competent desk. I know what you're talking about.
That's not easy to dive into that, but I think there is, let's be diplomatic, much work to be done, of course.
There's no Azerbaijan Watch group or NGO or something.
Oh, you mean outside of armed forces?
Yeah. Is there anyone that's dedicated to watching exactly what they're doing, knowing what their procurements are?
Outside of armed forces, we see that in Armenia there is no defense analysis, unfortunately. Almost nothing. It's like APRI Armenia with one small department. Consisting, unfortunately, yet of me mostly. So, but this is a very bad thing. Yeah, there is no defense analysis outside of armed forces, which I still can't understand why. Because I mean, we had 60,000 people serving in armed forces for 30 years. I don't know why nobody out of this huge number want to continue doing something related to armed forces. So technically we have maybe that's too general, but maybe we have a situation when nobody out of everybody who served in army was really interested in what he was doing. So that sounds very tragic to me.
Let's be honest about it. We had even in the diaspora, we grew up with all of these myths. The reality of the situation, as far as I understand it, is we had a play essentially. We had guys who dressed up in army uniforms. They marched, they took the money, they drove the Mercedes to show to their friends, and they put all the medals, oftentimes not earned, and they showed off to their friends and family that they're in the army, never expecting that they would have to actually do their jobs and protect this country. They all thought Russia would do it for us, so we abdicated our responsibility to defend the little strip of land that we still have. That's the reality. That's why we're starting so far back. We should be honest about this and stop pretending that we had this superpower of an army that could have defeated the US and Russia combined.
We had in 94 and then it went down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
it was a quite capable and mobile and quite modern army in '94, I would say, in terms of doctrines, approaches, and everything.
Yeah, the Jogats were moving independently. It was very interesting to look at what they're doing and compared to what we had in 2020. But I do, in the interest of time, I do want to go a little bit deeper in Azerbaijan's army reforms, because I think it would be remiss not to mention this. So since you are the only dedicated
not the only
Azerbaijan watch, let's say the prime Azerbaijan watch desk in this country, what are they doing? What should we be looking out for? There's constant. Even today, you have this is like the second delegation this month of Turkish defense officials there. What's going on?
They continue working with Turkey, of course, mostly, and they're putting more emphasis on building more and more special operation troops of different types. Ones are kind of boosted infantry, so therefore just really making the attacks. So that's like stormtroopers, of something. Very professional stormtroopers. And the other is the real spec ops, which is like Yashma, for example. That's the guys who are doing operations behind the enemy lines, and that's not just for stormtroopers. They are not stormtroopers. So they're very much putting emphasis on bolstering this capacity, continuing bolstering this capacity, because it played out quite well in 2020.
And 21 in Jermuk.
Yeah. In general, it plays out quite well. And they see that Armenia don't have even half of that kind of troops to oppose them, even 25% of that troops to. So they have brigades of special troops now. We see also discussions in Azerbaijan about shortening the military service to 1 year, which somebody may be happy about, thinking that maybe they're also looking for a peace agreement, but I think they're also just looking for having more professionals in armed forces and changing they're going to be above us in terms of numbers next year's anyway, so I think they just decided to have more professional units and less conscripts. That's just it. Probably because of the lessons they have themselves seen in 2020, seeing that their normal troops kind of were not much better than our normal troops, or were even peer or worse than our normal troops. So we see the procurement, which they continue doing massively. Most of it, if before 2020 they were PRing most of their procurement, nowadays almost everything procured from Israel is secret. We just see that the aircrafts are
constant
going
flights.
And coming. The only open contracts were for Barak MX air defense systems, quite a large contract, $1.2 billion. And for new satellites, imagery satellites with 50 centimeter resolution, quite good stuff, unfortunately. We see with Turkey a very, I think, good modernization of Su-25 attack aircraft. It now can carry all the Turkish guided munitions for attacking our ground targets. So that's a very serious thing, and I think this kind of aircraft is much more capable than Bayraktar TB2 is, if we will compare. So much harder target to destroy, and if it's using a guided missile or a bomb, which can be, I think, shot at our targets from 50-60 kilometers, that's going to be a new task for air defense we have. So it's makes no sense to be preparing for 2020 anymore, because there's absolutely different capacities Azerbaijan will have next time. So another big investment in jet fighters from Pakistan.
China, Pakistan.
1.8 billion, 1.6 billion, I think, according to open source.
What's the timeline of delivery on those? And essentially, these are Soviet airframes that have been kind of upgraded. I mean, a lot of it is flash, but they're notorious for having.
Yeah, but when you don't have anything, it's when it's against nothing, it's not bad. Yeah. So, of course, that's one of the worst 4+ generation jet fighters available on the market, I think. Yeah. The JF-17, but we have 4 jet fighters at the moment, so that's
without munitions, as far as we know.
I mean, maybe I wouldn't say without munitions, with some Soviet munitions, for example. That's what we have. So we need to be looking in all these directions, of course. We see that artillery, they also invest in artillery, 155 millimeter after we started doing that. And
Serbia and
Serbia, Slovakia, yeah. So they're not sitting on the place, they're developing, and even from open source you can see how many things they did in last years. And they are boosting their spending. So next time we will have, of course, a much more comprehensive and much more heavy air operations than they did last time. So with all this new modernized aircraft with new guided munitions, which are not light guided munitions like Bayraktar or loitering munitions, which Azerbaijan was, but 500 kilogram air bombs and 250 kilograms air bombs. And with these bombs, you also need to, there are ways when you can shut down the bombs, the missiles. So there should be an absolutely different approach to air defense. It should be much more decentralized. There should be lots of very short range air defense assets, which are cheaper to use against this kind of multiple targets. There, for example, I very much like that one of the exhibition I've seen a French module for an armored car, just a 30 millimeter gun, which creates a 500 meter bubble around the car technically. So you can just put 2 or 3 of these cars into the, let's say, your column of moving trucks or something, or equipment, not trucks hopefully, but something else. So, but yeah, to protect.
Bastions.
Yeah. I mean, it can be a bastion on which you can put a turret like that technically. So you need to defend from the lowest ranges. Your troops need to know how to shoot at drones from the firing arms, kind of. So they how to use AK to shoot down a loitering munition. So FPV drone, a copter. So from the very lowest level to, I don't know. I mean, S-300s we have. I mean, maybe 2 French. One day, hopefully, French Aster 30 or something like that. So there can't be a disbalanced air defense anymore. And in 2020, that was the tragedy. We just had no medium-range air defense, like nothing, technically. No systems. Only very short range. You mean like Panzers and stuff? No, Panzer we never had. We had a Tor, for example. Tor was good, objectively. It's a good system, but not many of them. OSA, if used in the right way, also it can have added value. But if you can't shoot at targets which fly at altitude of 6 kilometers and higher, that's a big problem. And that's quite, I mean, I don't know who was planning all this. I know who was planning all this stuff, but that's not how things can be done, of course.
I wish we can end on a positive note. Is there anything good that you're excited about in the future when it comes to reforms?
At least the Akash system is covering the medium ranges and altitudes.
Thank God for the Indians. Right, yeah. Thank God for the Indians.
Yeah, but I mean, no, I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I'm trying to be I'm trying to underline the problems, so it's like
so they get resolved.
That's probably one of the problems of the past, also that it was not kind of allowed to talk about problems.
Yeah.
So
let's hope Mr. Papikyan's watching this and we'll take your advice into consideration.
So in terms of reforms, I in the beginning I told that I think the most important thing is to put out bureaucracy from this kind of activities. Try experiment, model. You don't need to try to plan everything from very beginning. For example, the FPV drones topic is now let's finish on a, I don't know if it's a positive thing or not, but on FPV drones. So FPV drones, you can't go and buy 100,000 of FPV drones tomorrow because of one reason. They're going to be garbage in a year after the time you did that, because this technology is all the time evolving. So what you need to do, you need to have a unit of FPV guys, let's say spec ops unit, 30, 40 guys with some engineering skills which you need in that sense, who have a budget which is not so heavily controlled like the normal one. The small budget, $200,000, $300,000 per year. So they just procure all the stuff. They follow everything in this technology all the time. So the only tasks they have is being on the verge of the development of this technology, and also to train some other people to basics. So if a war starts, then you can in a very short time adapt, make the big orders, and start using the technology on the battlefield. So and what else? These guys also should then participate in every training and drill Armenian armed forces are doing, and hunt our own troops with these FPVs. Without, of course, the munition on it. So then people can train how to behave, how to shut down all this stuff. So that's the way how things can really work, how reform can work. So it's not about only writing the papers.
Yeah, you need war games.
Yeah.
Leonid Nersisyan from APRI, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks again for watching Civilnet.